The year was 1872. A storm gathered over the vast, untamed frontier, the wind whispering through the tall grass like a restless spirit. The wooden cabin stood at the edge of a clearing, its lanterns flickering against the encroaching darkness. Inside, the scent of firewood and baking bread mingled, a fragile bubble of warmth against the night. Emily Carter sat at the wooden table, humming softly as she stitched a tear in her dress, her fingers moving with careful precision. Her mother, Mary, worked by the hearth, the golden glow of the fire lighting the soft lines of her face. Across the room, her father, James, checked his rifle, the metallic click of the chamber unsettling against the quiet. Outside, the horses in the barn stirred uneasily. A gust of wind rattled the shutters, but something about it felt wrong. Too sudden, too expectant. James frowned, moving toward the door. He pulled it open just a crack, peering into the night. His eyes narrowed. A low sound, just barely a whisper, cut through the wind. A war cry. The night exploded. James barely had time to slam the door before the first arrow struck the frame, splintering wood near his shoulder. "Get down," he barked, grabbing his rifle. Mary pulled Emily behind her, shielding her against the kitchen wall as shadows rushed through the darkness outside. Hooves pounded against the earth, war-painted figures emerging like ghosts from the tall grass. The sharp whistle of another arrow cut through the air. A window shattered. A flaming torch sailed through the open door and crashed against the wooden floor, instantly igniting into a twisting serpent of fire. Smoke filled the room. James fired wildly into the night, his voice hoarse as he yelled for Mary to take Emily and run. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs. The fire spread rapidly, licking at the wooden beams of the house. Her mother grabbed her wrist, yanking her toward the back door. But before they could reach it, the front door burst open and figures stormed inside. Everything turned into chaos. A warrior tackled James to the ground. His rifle fired into the ceiling, sending a cloud of dust raining down. Mary screamed, clutching Emily close as rough hands grabbed at them. Emily kicked wildly, her fingers clawing at the arms that wrapped around her, but she was no match for the sheer force that lifted her off the ground. She saw her father struggling, saw the glint of a knife before it plunged down. The world slowed. James gasped, a shudder rippling through his frame. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and glistening. He collapsed, unmoving. A wail tore from Mary's throat, but her grief was silenced as the butt of a rifle struck the side of her head. Her body crumpled. Emily screamed. The sound barely left her throat before she was slung over a horse, her breath knocked from her lungs as the animal reared and bolted into the night. The ground raced beneath her. The only thing she could see was the glow of her burning home shrinking behind her, devoured by the black maw of the wilderness. The wind bit against her skin. The jarring rhythm of the horse's gallop left her body aching, her arms bound cruelly behind her back. Each bound sent sharp jolts through her ribs, but the warriors paid her no mind. They rode for hours. The night swallowed them whole, stretching endlessly over the land. Emily fought to stay upright, her mind spinning. The world as she knew it had vanished. Her father gone, her mother left in the dirt. The thought threatened to drown her, but she couldn't let it. Not yet. Dawn threatened the horizon when the riders finally slowed. Emily's legs were numb, her wrists raw against the rope. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. They had reached the mountains. She was unceremoniously yanked from the horse, her knees hitting the ground with a bruising impact. Around her, the warriors spoke in a tongue she couldn't understand, their voices sharp, debating something in hushed urgency. She caught glimpses of their expressions, some indifferent, some amused. One warrior, taller than the rest, gestured toward her with a cruel grin. She forced herself not to shrink back. Another warrior stepped forward, his presence quieter yet more commanding. His dark eyes flicked over her, unreadable. He was younger than the others, his features marked with war paint but not with the same hardness. His name, she would later learn, was Taza. For a moment, they stared at one another. He didn't speak. Then he turned away. Emily's stomach twisted. She had no idea what fate awaited her, but she knew it wasn't mercy. They kept her bound as they made camp that night. She sat on the cold ground, watching them with wary eyes. They built fires, their movements fluid and practiced. Smoke curled into the night air, carrying the scent of charred meat. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she refused to show weakness. A warrior tossed a strip of dried meat near her feet. She stared at it, then at them. Laughter rippled through the group, except for Taza. He watched in silence. She clenched her jaw. Hours passed. Her muscles ached from the bindings, her body trembling from exhaustion. She refused to cry, refused to let them see her break. But when her gaze landed on the warrior's blade resting in the dirt, gleaming under the fire's glow, her pulse quickened. If she could just reach it. Carefully, she shifted her weight, inching toward it. The warriors were deep in conversation, laughter rolling through the air. Her fingers stretched out. A boot suddenly slammed down over the blade. She jolted back, her breath catching. Taza stood over her, his gaze steady, unreadable. She expected him to call out to the others, to punish her. Instead, he crouched down, his voice low. "Do not try," he murmured. She froze. He had spoken in English. His eyes flicked toward her bindings. After a beat, he pulled a knife from his belt and, with a swift motion, sliced them loose. Emily stared at him, rubbing her wrists in disbelief. Another warrior noticed. "Why do you care what happens to her?" he asked in Apache. Taza didn't answer. He simply stood and walked away. Morning came. They rode again, deeper into the wilderness. Emily's body screamed with soreness, but she kept her back straight. The land shifted, trees giving way to canyons, the air growing dry. They were moving toward the Apache heartland. She wasn't meant to leave. The realization settled over her like a weight. She would be given to another tribe, or worse, claimed by one of them. The thought sent a cold dread through her. She gripped the locket around her neck, the only thing she had left. Somewhere in the shifting light of dawn, she caught Taza watching her. He didn't look away. Neither did she. And for the first time since the raid, a spark of something unfamiliar flickered in her chest. Hope. But hope, in the wild, was a dangerous thing. The sun was beginning its descent when they stopped near the banks of a winding river, its waters sluggish under the weight of summer's heat. The warriors dismounted, their voices low murmurs as they prepared for the night. Emily slid from the horse, her legs buckling beneath her. She caught herself before she fell, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Her wrists ached where the bindings had been, her skin rubbed raw. But the pain was nothing compared to the gnawing certainty in her gut. If she did not find a way out now, there would be no more chances. Taza stood a few paces away, watching her with that same unreadable gaze. He had been near her ever since the night he cut her bindings, never intervening, but never letting her out of his sight. His presence was both unsettling and strangely reassuring. The others saw her as nothing more than a prize, a symbol of their victory. But him, he was something else. She just didn't know what. As the fire crackled to life, Emily edged closer to the river, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth. The sound of water was a whisper in the stillness, a promise of escape. If she could slip into the current, let it carry her downstream, she might have a chance. The thought made her heart pound, but she knew better than to let hope blind her to the dangers. The river was not just a path to freedom. It was a test of survival. A shadow moved beside her. "Taza, you will not make it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's fingers curled into fists. "Then let me die trying." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not amusement, not pity. Something deeper. He glanced toward the others, making sure they weren't listening, then turned back to her. "Not here. Not now." A chill swept through her, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Why do you care?" Taza didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away. Night fell. The warriors slept in scattered positions around the fire, their horses tethered nearby, their weapons within reach. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth. The river murmured in the background, a steady pulse against the hush of the wilderness. Emily lay still, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She waited, counted the breaths between the shifting of bodies. When she was certain no one was watching, she began to inch backward, one careful movement at a time. The dirt was cool beneath her fingers. A hand clamped around her wrist. She barely bit back a gasp. Her eyes snapped to the figure crouched beside her. Taza. He shook his head once. Emily's heart plummeted. But before she could speak, he motioned toward the horses. Then, without another word, he took out his knife and sliced through the rope at her feet. Confusion warred with disbelief. But there was no time for questions. She followed him, her body tense with anticipation. Every step a silent prayer that the others wouldn't wake. They reached the horses. He untied one, placing the reins in her hands. "Go," he whispered. Her fingers tightened around the leather. "What about you?" Taza's eyes flicked toward the warriors. "I will lead them away." She hesitated, 1,000 questions forming in her mind. Why was he doing this? What did he hope to gain? But then a shout rang out, a warrior stirring in his sleep. "Go," Taza hissed. Emily swung onto the horse, her hands shaking as she gripped the reins. She barely had time to urge the animal forward before Taza let out a sharp whistle, drawing attention away from her. The camp erupted into chaos, warriors jolting awake, shouts filling the night. Arrows whistled past her ears, the sound sending fresh terror surging through her veins. She rode, hard, fast. The wilderness swallowed her whole. Branches tore at her skin as she pushed the horse deeper into the forest, the pounding of hooves a frantic rhythm against the earth. The night was thick with danger, the shadows pressing in from all sides. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The river appeared ahead, silver under the moonlight. A war cry echoed behind her. Emily's stomach twisted. They were gaining on her. She had no choice. She kicked the horse forward, straight toward the water. The animal hesitated only a moment before plunging in, the cold of violent shock against her burning skin. The current pulled at them instantly, dragging them downstream. Emily clung to the horse's neck, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The force of the river threatened to tear her away, but she held on, even as the water stole the air from her lungs. Then, just as suddenly as it had taken her, the river spit her out onto the muddy bank. She coughed, shaking, her limbs numb. The horse thrashed a few feet away before scrambling onto land. The night was eerily silent, the war cries lost in the distance. She had made it, but she was alone. The wilderness was an unforgiving master. Emily learned that quickly. With the sun creeping over the horizon, she moved carefully, her body aching from exhaustion. Every sound, every rustling leaf, every distant call of an animal sent her heart racing. She had no weapon, no food, only the clothes clinging to her damp skin and the locket hanging from her neck. By midday, thirst gnawed at her. The river was too dangerous to linger near, so she searched for smaller streams, stopping only when her legs threatened to give out. Hunger followed soon after, a deep, unrelenting ache. She tried to remember what her father had once told her about finding food in the wild, roots, berries, anything that wouldn't kill her, but fear clouded her thoughts. By nightfall, the cold set in. She curled against the base of a tree, arms wrapped around herself, her body shivering. And then she heard it, a twig snapping. She shot up, her pulse a wild drum in her chest. A figure emerged from the trees. Taza. Shock stole her breath. He was alone. His face was unreadable, but there was no hostility in his stance. Emily scrambled to her feet. "Did they send you to kill me?" He exhaled, stepping forward. "They think you drowned." Her throat tightened. She should have felt relief. Instead, all she could focus on was the simple fact that he was here, that he had followed her. Taza glanced at the sky. You will not survive alone. She clenched her fists. I don't need your help. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not amusement, something deeper. Then why are you still alive? Emily's breath caught. They stared at each other, the weight of the wilderness pressing in around them. Finally, she dropped her gaze. Because of you. Silence stretched between them. Then, Taza reached into the pouch at his waist and tossed something toward her. A strip of dried meat. She caught it instinctively, staring at it before looking back up at him. A beat passed. He turned away, disappearing into the trees. Emily looked down at the food in her hands. She didn't know why, but she knew he would be back. And for the first time since she had been taken, she wasn't afraid. The days bled together in an uneasy truce. The wilderness demanded everything from them: endurance, patience, trust. Emily had never imagined she would rely on a man like Taza, but out here, survival left no room for pride. He taught her how to move through the land without making a sound, how to read the earth beneath her feet. She watched him strike flint to start a fire, gut a rabbit with practiced efficiency. And he watched her, too, watched as she learned, as she refused to give in to weakness, as she grew into something more than the terrified girl he had first seen by the fire. One evening, as the sun dipped low, turning the sky the color of embers, she sat beside him near a small creek. The water ran slow and steady, a quiet companion to their silence. She traced the edge of her locket with her thumb, the metal warm from her skin. I used to think the world was small, she murmured, the word surprising even herself. Just my home, my family. I thought that was all there was. Taza didn't look at her, but she knew he was listening. And now, he asked. She exhaled, staring at the water. Now, I don't know who I am. Taza was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for a stone, running his thumb over its smooth surface. We are never who we were, he said simply. The river does not stay the same. Emily turned her gaze to him. And you? Who are you? His jaw tightened, his eyes shadowed. A man without a people. The words carried weight, more than she could understand. She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her that some wounds could not be spoken aloud. Instead, she reached out, hesitating before brushing her fingers against his. His breath hitched just barely. Then he stood. Rest, he said, his voice unreadable. Tomorrow we keep moving. The moment passed, fragile as a falling leaf. That night, sleep did not come easily. The next morning they pressed forward. They had to move carefully now, closer to the land of her people, but still deep in territory where danger lurked behind every shadow. Taza scouted ahead, his movements swift, efficient. Emily followed, her steps quieter than they had once been. She had changed. The girl who had been dragged from her home was gone, replaced by something harder, something forged by fire and loss. By midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked a valley, a vast expanse of golden fields stretching toward the horizon. Emily's breath caught in her throat. I know this place, she whispered. Home! It was so close she could almost taste it. Taza stood beside her, silent. She turned to him, her heart pounding. Come with me? He didn't answer at first. His gaze remained on the horizon, unreadable, distant. Then, finally, he shook his head. I cannot. A lump formed in her throat. Why? His expression darkened. Your people would not welcome me. Anger flared in her chest, hot and sudden. That's not fair, she snapped. You saved me. His eyes met hers, steady. It does not matter. Before she could argue, a sound split the air. A war cry. Panic surged through her veins. They had been followed. Taza's hand was already on his knife, his muscles tensing. Emily turned, her breath coming fast and sharp. Shadows moved through the trees below. Chato, He had come for them. Taza pushed her back against the rock. Run. I'm not leaving you. He gritted his teeth. You must. No. A moment of hesitation. Then Chato emerged, his warriors at his back. His expression twisted with fury. You betray your blood, Chato spat, his voice laced with venom. Taza did not flinch. She is not our enemy. She is white. Chato's voice cracked like a whip. Their kind took everything from us. And now you stand against your own for her. Taza's jaw clenched. This is not justice. Chato's eyes burned with something dangerous, something irreparable. He stepped forward, his hand tightening around his tomahawk. You are no longer one of us, he said, voice low. You are nothing. And then he struck. Taza barely dodged the blow, the blade slicing through the air where his head had been. The fight was brutal, a clash of bone and fury. Taza moved with the precision of a man who had nothing left to lose, his knife flashing in the light. Chato was relentless, his rage fueling every strike. Emily's pulse pounded. She wanted to help, wanted to do something, but she was frozen, trapped in the moment, in the sheer savagery of it. Then Chato gained the upper hand. He drove Taza back against a tree, his tomahawk raised. Emily didn't think. She moved, her fingers closed around a rock, her body launching forward. She swung with everything she had. The impact sent Chato staggering. Taza didn't hesitate. He drove his knife into Chato's side, swift, merciless. Chato gasped, his eyes widening in shock. For a second, everything stood still. Then he crumpled. Silence fell over the forest, heavy as a storm cloud. The other warriors hesitated. Their leader was dead. Without him, there was no cause to fight. One by one, they melted into the trees, vanishing like ghosts. Emily stood trembling, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Taza knelt beside Chato's still body, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he looked up. We must go. She swallowed, nodding. They left the body behind, the air thick with the scent of blood and loss. By the time they reached the valley, the sun was sinking low, the world bathed in gold. In the distance, the faint outline of a settlement stood against the sky. Emily's breath shuddered. Home! She turned to Taza, her chest aching. Come with me. His expression was soft now, but resolute. I cannot. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Then stay close. Something flickered in his eyes. A promise. A goodbye. Slowly, he released her fingers. And then, as the first shouts of recognition rang from the settlement, as figures rushed toward her, he disappeared into the wild. Emily didn't turn back. She knew he was watching, and somehow, she knew their paths were not yet finished. The wind carried a bitter chill across the Texas plains, rustling the dry grass in ghostly whispers. The night stretched wide and merciless, the sky ablaze with 1,000 stars that did nothing to warm the earth below. Abigail Monroe stood at the edge of her family's homestead, her fingers tightening around the worn fabric of her shawl. Something felt wrong. She had always trusted her instincts, an unspoken warning buried in the marrow of her bones. It was the same feeling she'd had when she was younger, just before a band of drifters had ransacked a nearby farm, leaving behind only smoldering wood and grieving widows. That same unease now gripped her as she crept toward the side of the house, drawn by the murmuring voices that slithered through the gaps in the log walls. Silas Monroe's voice was unmistakable, rough, authoritative, tinged with impatience. Abigail's father had a way of speaking that made every word sound like a decree, as if arguing against him was as futile as cursing the sun for rising. She's healthy, young, Silas said. That should be enough. A second voice, lower, threaded with amusement. She's pretty enough, I'll give you that. But a girl's worth ain't just in looks. You sure she'll do as she's told? A heavy pause. Abigail felt her heartbeat quicken. She don't got a choice, Silas muttered. She'll do as she's told, or she'll pay for it. Her breath hitched. She pressed closer, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Seems a steep trade for safe passage," the stranger said, his voice laced with mockery. "But if she's half as obedient as you say, I reckon we've got a deal." Abigail staggered backward, nausea twisting through her stomach like a coiled snake. Her father, her own blood, was trading her away like livestock. For what? Safe passage? She didn't have to guess who these men were. Outlaws, drifters, men who lived by gunpowder and greed. A wave of cold fury rushed over her, burning away her disbelief. She had spent her life enduring her father's cruelty, his heavy hand, his sharp words that sliced deeper than any blade. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. She turned sharply, her boots crunching against the dry earth as she moved toward the stable. If she was quick, if she could saddle a horse before anyone noticed. A hand snatched her wrist, jerking her back so hard her breath left her in a rush. Silas loomed over her, his fingers digging into her skin like iron shackles. "You listen to me, girl," he hissed. "You think you can run? Where would you go? The Comanche own the land past the river, and even if they don't gut you on sight, the wilderness will." Abigail struggled against his grip, her nails clawing at his arm. "I'd rather take my chances than be sold like a broodmare." Silas' expression darkened. He struck her hard across the face, the force of it snapping her head to the side. Stars burst behind her eyes, and she staggered, tasting blood. "You will do as I say," he growled, "or I'll make sure those men don't care what condition you're in when they take you." A distant howl rose from the plains. Coyotes, perhaps, or something else. Silas released her, shoving her back toward the cabin. "Get inside," he ordered, "and don't do anything stupid." Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not break. Not for him. Not for anyone. The night dragged on, thick with suffocating silence. Abigail lay on her cot, her mind racing. Escape was impossible now. Her father had men watching the property. But tomorrow, when the outlaws came to claim her, she would fight. She would rather die than let them take her. The sound of hooves shattered the quiet. Not one horse. Many. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air shifted, thick with something unseen but undeniable. Then came the first scream, a raw, gurgling sound that was cut short too soon. Gunfire followed. Chaos exploded outside, the sharp cracks of rifles mixing with the guttural war cries of men who were neither outlaws nor settlers. The Comanche had come. The door to the cabin burst open, and her father stormed inside, his face pale, his rifle clenched in his fists. "Get down!" he barked. Abigail didn't move. She could hear the horses, the rush of footsteps, the clash of steel on steel. The outlaws were screaming now. Men who killed without hesitation were suddenly the prey. And then, in the flickering lantern light, a figure filled the doorway. The man who stepped inside was not an outlaw, nor one of the settlers she had known all her life. He was something else entirely. Tall, broad-shouldered, his long black hair framing a face that was both fearsome and unreadable. His chest was bare except for a necklace of bone and turquoise, and in his hand he held a bloody tomahawk. Silas raised his rifle. The warrior moved faster. Abigail barely had time to process what happened before her father collapsed to the floor, his rifle clattering beside him. A clean wound gaped at his throat, and his eyes, so full of cruelty just moments ago, were glassy and vacant. Abigail pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her father was dead. The warrior stepped toward her. She could see him more clearly now, the way his gaze lingered on her, measuring, assessing. He was no ordinary raider. There was something in his stance, in the way the other warriors moved around him, that spoke of command. She understood then, with a sickening certainty. This was their leader. He was here for her. Hands seized her arms before she could fight. She lashed out, kicking, biting, thrashing against them, but they were stronger. More hands joined in. binding her wrists, dragging her outside into the firelit night. The settlement was gone. Flames devoured the wooden structures, licking hungrily at the night sky. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, some belonging to the outlaws, some to her neighbors. Blood soaked the earth. A horse was brought forward, its coat gleaming in the firelight. Abigail struggled harder, but it was useless. They lifted her onto the saddle, binding her hands to the saddle horn. She met the warrior's gaze once more. His face remained impassive, unreadable, but there was no cruelty in his expression. A command was given in Comanche, and the horses turned. Abigail twisted in the saddle, her breath catching as she looked back at what had once been her home. Nothing remained but ash and ruin. The wind howled across the plains as the Comanche warriors rode into the night, carrying her into the unknown. The ride was relentless. Abigail's wrists ached where the rawhide bindings cut into her skin, her body jostling painfully with each jarring movement of the horse. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, an ocean of dust and scrub under the silvery gaze of the moon. She tried to focus on the horizon, searching for anything familiar, but there was nothing. No landmarks, no hope of escape. Only the steady beat of hooves against the hard-packed earth. The warriors rode in silence, their presence as imposing as the landscape itself. They moved as one, their formation tight, their watchful eyes scanning the darkness. Abigail knew little of the Comanche beyond the fearful stories whispered among settlers, tales of ruthless raids, of captives vanishing into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Now, she was one of them. Her captor, the one who had killed her father, rode just ahead. She didn't know his name, but she knew his authority. He carried himself with an air of command, his movements deliberate and sure. Even in the dim light, she could see the scars that traced his skin, markers of battles won and blood spilled. His silence unnerved her more than threats would have. The night stretched long and unforgiving, each hour a test of endurance. By the time dawn crept over the land, painting the sky in muted hues of lavender and gold, Abigail was numb from exhaustion. Her mouth was dry, her limbs stiff. But stopping was not an option. They pressed forward, deeper into Comanche territory, further from everything she had ever known. When they finally slowed, she could barely keep her eyes open. The horses wove through a stand of cottonwoods, the cool shade of small mercy after the endless ride under the open sky. Then, without warning, hands gripped her waist and pulled her down from the horse. She landed hard, her legs buckling beneath her. Laughter rippled through the warriors at her weakness, but the amusement was fleeting. They wasted no time securing her. A length of rawhide bound her hands, though this time in front of her, allowing some movement. Another rope tethered her to a sturdy post near a group of low, hide-covered lodges. The village was alive with morning activity. Women moved among the fires, stirring pots, their eyes flicking toward her with unreadable expressions. Children darted between the lodges, their curiosity evident but tempered by wariness. Men stood in small groups, sharpening weapons, speaking in a language she could not understand. A figure approached, an older woman with sharp eyes and a face lined with experience. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied back in a braid, and her movements carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She crouched in front of Abigail, studying her with a gaze that felt like a blade peeling back her defenses. The woman said something, her voice calm but firm. Abigail shook her head. "I don't understand." A sigh. Then, slowly, deliberately, the woman reached forward and touched Abigail's hands, running her fingers over the bindings. A question, unspoken yet clear. Abigail swallowed hard. She could still feel the ghost of her father's grip, the sting of his slap. She thought of the outlaws, of the future that had awaited her at their hands. She thought of the blood, the fire, the fact that she had no home to return to. Finally, she nodded. The woman gave a curt nod in return and, to Abigail's astonishment, cut the bindings. Abigail flexed her fingers, rubbing the raw skin. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was uncertainty. She was still a captive, still at their mercy. The only thing that had changed was the manner of her confinement. She was given water first, then food, flatbread, dried meat. She hesitated, half expecting a trick, but hunger won out. The warriors ignored her as she ate, speaking among themselves as if she were nothing more than an afterthought. The only one who seemed to watch her with any real interest was her captor. He stood apart, his gaze steady, unreadable. She could feel the weight of it, a silent force pressing against her. There was something unnerving about the way he studied her. Not cruel, not indifferent, but assessing, measuring. She was still trying to decide whether to meet his gaze or avoid it when the woman who had freed her bindings returned. This time, she carried a bundle of clothes. She set them down in front of Abigail and gestured at the torn, dust-covered dress she still wore. The meaning was clear. Abigail bristled. She had already lost so much. Her home, her family, her freedom. Now, they wanted to strip away the last remnants of the life she had known. The woman watched her struggle, then spoke again, her tone softer. A reassurance, maybe, an offering of understanding. Then, without another word, she rose and walked away. Abigail stared at the clothes. They were simple, made of soft leather and cloth, practical for survival in this land. She knew she had no choice. If she was to endure this, to survive, she had to adapt. The change was more than just physical. When she emerged from the lodge wearing the Comanche clothing, she felt as if she had stepped further away from who she had been. The settlers would no longer see her as one of their own. And if she was not one of them, then what was she? The warriors took little notice of her transformation, but the women, they watched, some with pity, others with something closer to acceptance. And one, a girl only a few years older than Abigail, offered her a small piece of fruit without a word. She took it. The day passed in slow, careful steps. She was given tasks, small ones, nothing that required too much trust. Gathering water, sorting dried herbs. She worked in silence, her mind constantly shifting between escape and survival, between hate and something she could not yet name. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, she heard her name. She turned to find him standing there, her captor, the chief. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He studied her as he always did, and she forced herself to meet his gaze this time. Then, he said a single word. It took her a moment to realize it was a name. Tahu. Her breath caught. He was giving her something she had not expected, a name to call him by. Her throat was dry, her voice barely more than a whisper. But she spoke. Abigail. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not amusement, not cruelty, just acknowledgement. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. She watched him go, confusion knotting in her chest. The ground beneath her feet still felt foreign. The people around her still spoke a language she could not understand. But for the first time since she had been taken, something shifted. She was not invisible. She was not forgotten. She was something else now. And that terrified her more than anything. The fire crackled softly in the center of the Comanche encampment, casting flickering shadows across the assembled warriors. Abigail sat near the edge of the gathering, her hands resting on her knees, her mind restless as she listened to the low murmur of voices in a language she was beginning to understand, though not yet speak. It had been weeks since her capture, yet she no longer felt like a prisoner. She worked alongside the women now, weaving, grinding maize, tending to the horses. She had learned to move through the camp without drawing fearful glances, to drink in the quiet, watchful way of the Comanche instead of resisting it. But trust was a slow thing, fragile as a strand of thread, easily snapped. Tahu sat across the fire, his sharp eyes scanning the warriors who spoke to him in hushed tones. He had been watching her, as he always did, not with cruelty, but with an unreadable intensity. She had come to understand that he was not a man who spoke needlessly. His silence was not a dismissal but a study, an assessment. When the murmuring stopped, a ripple of tension moved through the gathering. The air thickened with something unspoken, but understood by all. Koda, a warrior she had come to recognize as Tahu's closest ally, stood and spoke in clipped, serious tones. She heard a name she did recognize. James Calloway. A knot tightened in her stomach. She knew that name well. He had ridden with her father more than once, his voice thick with whiskey, his hands quick to strike when a woman displeased him. He had been one of the outlaws meant to claim her, and now he was coming to finish what had been interrupted. Tahu stood, speaking to the warriors in a measured tone. She caught only fragments. Calloway had men. They were coming. Her breath hitched, a strange mixture of fear and rage swelling in her chest. They were coming for her. But not just her. They would burn the village, kill the people who had taken her in, the ones who had spared her life when they could have left her to die alongside her father. She turned her gaze to Tahu. He was watching her again, but this time there was something different in his eyes, expectation, a challenge, a choice. She understood then. This was her test. A Comanche woman had no place in battle, but she was not truly Comanche. And she was no longer the girl who had been dragged from her home, who had been tied to a horse and taken under the cover of darkness. She pushed herself to her feet. "I know them," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I know how they think." Silence settled over the warriors. Tahu did not speak immediately, but his gaze never left hers. Then, slowly, he nodded. That night, she sat with Koda and another warrior, marking lines in the dirt, drawing the paths Calloway's men would take. She spoke of their habits, their weaknesses, how they would wait until the deepest part of the night, how they would circle the village before striking. She had seen them do it before. When the warriors moved, she moved with them. Tahu led them into the darkness, their figures mere shadows against the endless stretch of land. Abigail's heart pounded, but she forced herself to steady her breath, to move as they moved, silent, watchful. The hours stretched thin. Then at last they came. The outlaws moved as she had predicted, their figures barely visible in the dim moonlight. They believed themselves unseen, creeping toward the sleeping village with knives drawn, rifles ready. But they were wrong. The first strike was swift and merciless. A Comanche warrior leapt from the darkness, his blade flashing as he slit the throat of the nearest man before he could scream. The others rushed forward, their war cries breaking the silence like thunder. Abigail didn't hesitate. She had no blade, no rifle, but she had a purpose. She moved among the chaos, grabbing a fallen pistol, its weight unfamiliar but necessary in her hands. She saw him then, Calloway. He stood near the edge of the skirmish, his expression contorted in fury as he fired wildly into the fight. He hadn't expected this. He had thought them easy prey. She raised the gun, her fingers trembling. He turned, and his eyes locked onto hers. Recognition flickered, followed by something cruel. Well, he sneered. "Still breathing, are you? Guess I'll have to fix that." He moved toward her. She fired. The shot was wild, missing by inches. His laughter was cut short as he lunged, grabbing for her wrist. She fought, struggling against his strength, his breath hot against her face as he slammed her back against a rock. "You think you're one of them now?" he growled, forcing her arm up, twisting her wrist until the gun fell from her grasp. "You're nothing, just some lost little." A blade sliced through his side. Calloway's eyes widened, his body jerking as he staggered back. Blood soaked his shirt. Behind him, Tahu stood, his expression impassive as he pulled the knife free. Calloway collapsed, gasping, clawing at the earth. Tahu looked at her then. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The fight was over. By the time the last outlaw had fallen, the first light of dawn stretched across the land. Abigail stood in the quiet aftermath, her chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. She looked down at Calloway's body, at the man who had once thought he could own her, control her. She turned away. The warriors gathered the fallen, their own and their enemies, moving with the solemn efficiency of those who understood the weight of such things. Tahu stood at the center of it all, issuing orders with calm precision. She approached him. For the first time, she saw something in his expression she hadn't before: pride. Not in victory, in her. "You fought," he said. It was not a question. She nodded. "You stayed?" She swallowed. "Yes." Tahu studied her for a long moment, then reached up, pulling the bone necklace from around his neck. He held it out to her, a gesture, an offering, a choice. She stared at him. She could leave. She could run, disappear into the wilderness, try to find a life elsewhere. But where would she go? She was not the girl who had lived in that homestead. She was not the girl her father had tried to sell. She reached out and took the necklace. Tahu nodded, then turned away, walking back toward the village. Abigail remained where she was for a moment longer, staring at the horizon. She was free now, and for the first time, she knew exactly where she belonged.
The year was 1872. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and gunpowder, curling through the dense pine like an omen. Micah Bell rode alone, his horse's hooves a dull echo against the empty trail. The world behind him burned in memory, a decade of war and bloodshed, but the West, this cruel, untamed land, offered something close to peace. Or so he hoped. He pulled his coat tighter as the sky bled into twilight. The rifle across his saddle was worn but reliable, the revolver at his hip heavy with familiarity. He had outrun death before, but he could feel it close again, trailing his scent like a starving coyote. The trees stretched taller here, black silhouettes against the purple dusk. Somewhere a wolf howled, its cry lonely and sharp. Micah shifted in his saddle. He'd spent enough years in battlefields to know when something was off, when the woods held their breath just before trouble. A flicker of movement, a shadow slicing through the underbrush. Micah's hand drifted to his revolver, but before he could draw, the first shot rang out. His horse reared, screaming as a bullet tore through its flank. Micah barely had time to throw himself from the saddle before the second shot hit. He hit the dirt hard, rolling behind a fallen log as voices rose from the darkness. "Should have known you'd ride this way, Bell," a rough voice sneered. Micah pressed himself against the wood, his breathing steady despite the pain lancing through his shoulder. He knew that voice. Elijah Graves. The bastard had been a menace since Missouri, riding with a crew of cutthroats who put bullets in men's backs and stole from the dying. Micah risked a glance over the log. 5 of them, maybe 6, shifting like hungry dogs in the half-light. Graves stood at the front, broad-shouldered and grinning, the dim glow of his cigar illuminating a face carved by cruelty. "Not much of a welcome," Micah called, cocking his revolver. "Didn't think you deserved one." Graves stepped forward, boots crunching in the frostbitten dirt. "Been a long time, Micah. Heard you were looking for peace." He spat. "Man like you don't get that luxury." Micah exhaled slow, steady. He had 3 bullets left. "Not enough." "Tell you what," Graves said, tapping ash onto the ground. "Give yourself up, and maybe I don't gut you like a pig." Micah smiled without humor. He lifted his gun and fired. The first shot struck a man square in the chest. The second went wide as Micah scrambled back into the trees, his pulse pounding. They came after him, boots crashing against the underbrush, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels. He ducked behind a boulder, his breath visible in the cold air, fingers tightening around the revolver's grip. The trees swallowed the last of the daylight, and in the darkness, Micah's heartbeat filled his ears. He needed to move. Then something shifted behind him. Not the outlaws, not Graves. A whisper in the wind, not quite words, but something close. The hairs on Micah's neck stood on end, his breath stilled. Then a sharp cry tore through the woods. Gunfire, shouting, a horse's panic scream. Micah peered through the trees and saw Graves' men scattering, Their faces twisted in confusion. Something moved between them, fast as a shadow, too quick to be human. Micah took his chance. He sprinted through the chaos, ignoring the fire in his shoulder. Graves bellowed something behind him, but Micah didn't look back. The land sloped downward, leading to a river, black and glistening in the moonlight. His lungs burned, legs screaming for rest, but he didn't stop until his boots hit the muddy bank. A figure stepped into view. She stood at the water's edge, dark hair flowing over a worn deerskin cloak. The rifle in her hands wasn't pointed at him, but her stance spoke of someone who knew how to use it. Her face was sharp, her eyes unreadable. Micah raised his hands, though the gesture felt hollow. "Not looking for trouble," he rasped. The woman said nothing. The wind tugged at the fringes of her cloak. A rustle in the trees. Micah turned, gun ready, but the woods were empty. The outlaws were gone. "You're hurt," the woman said finally. Her voice was low, steady. Micah glanced at his shoulder. Blood soaked through his shirt, sluggish but persistent. "I'll live," he muttered. She studied him a moment longer before shouldering her rifle. "Not for long. Follow me." Micah hesitated. He had no reason to trust her, but the weight of exhaustion pressed against him, and his wounds ached in the cold. The woman turned without waiting for his answer. Micah exhaled, then followed. The cabin was small, tucked against the mountainside, hidden beneath the thick canopy. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and firewood. A single lantern flickered against the walls. She motioned for him to sit. He lowered himself onto the floor, watching as she knelt beside him, peeling away the torn fabric of his shirt. "Who are you?" he asked, wincing as she dabbed his wound with something that stung worse than the bullet. "Etzela," she said simply. He studied her face, the quiet intensity in her movements. There was something guarded about her, something weathered by loss. She finished tending to his wound, then sat back on her heels. "The men who came for you," she said, watching him. "They'll return." Micah nodded. "I know." She held his gaze, as if measuring the weight of his past. Then she reached for a wooden bowl, stirring its contents. "There are spirits in these woods," she said. Micah almost scoffed, but the memory of that whisper, that unnatural presence in the trees, held his tongue. "Some seek vengeance," she continued. "Others justice." "And which ones are after me?" he asked, voice quiet. She handed him the bowl. The mixture inside was dark, smelling of earth and something bitter. "Drink," she said. Micah hesitated, then took a slow sip. The taste was sharp, thick with something he didn't recognize. His vision blurred at the edges. The fire crackled, casting long shadows against the walls. Then he heard it again, the whisper. It curled through the room, wrapping around his bones. A voice not his own, speaking words he could not understand. Micah's breath turned shallow. Etzela watched him. "The dead know your name," she murmured. Outside, the wind howled. The night stretched long, pressing against the cabin like a living thing. Micah sat near the dying fire, fingers absently tracing the bandage on his shoulder, his mind restless. The woman, Etzela, moved silently, gathering dried herbs, grinding them between stone, the rhythmic motion steady and deliberate. She had barely spoken since he drank the bitter medicine, since the whispers in the dark curled around his name like fingers in the dust. He exhaled, watching the embers shift, their glow stretching shadows along the walls. "You said the dead know me." Etzela did not look up. "They do." A pause. "And—" She crushed the last of the dried leaves and let the silence weigh between them. Then, finally, she met his gaze. "Some call for vengeance. Others—" a slight tilt of her head, dark eyes unreadable. "Others call for you." A cold feeling settled in his chest, coiling deeper than fear. He had seen death in its cruelest forms, had delivered it without mercy. But something about the way she spoke of the dead, like they were beyond the grave, unsettled him. I don't put much stock in spirits, he muttered. You don't need to believe in them. She stood, crossing to the door. They believe in you. The wind rattled the walls. Something in the distance, a coyote or something less earthly, cried into the night. Etsila's expression remained unreadable, but Micah saw the way her fingers curled slightly against her side, the smallest betrayal of unease. His grip tightened around the revolver at his hip. At first light, they left the cabin behind. Etsila led them through the narrow trails winding between the trees, her steps careful, deliberate, as if she knew the land by something deeper than memory. Micah followed, his body still aching, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. He kept his rifle close, his nerves sharp. By midday, they reached a clearing where the land sloped downward into a valley, the river snaking through jagged rock and sparse pines. The silence felt unnatural here, thick and cloying, as if the world itself held its breath. Micah scanned the horizon. You know a place where we can hole up? There's a cave further west, she said. A place the Lakota call Wakinjiong Ozate, the nest of the thunderbirds. Micah exhaled sharply. Ain't never heard of it. You wouldn't have... She glanced at him. Few enter leave unchanged. He scoffed, shifting in the saddle. That's supposed to scare me? She didn't answer. The wind picked up as they rode, twisting through the dry grass, carrying whispers of voices long buried beneath the earth. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, pressing against Micah's ribs like a weight unseen. By sundown, they found the cave. Its mouth yawned wide, jagged rock forming the teeth of something ancient, something patient. Micah dismounted first, his boots crunching against the loose dirt. The entrance was shrouded in shadow, the kind that refused to yield even beneath the bleeding light of the setting sun. Etsila stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the darkness within. They say this place is older than the world itself. Micah tightened his grip on his rifle. You're awful fond of stories. Stories keep the past alive. She moved forward, stepping into the gloom. And sometimes they warn us of things we aren't meant to wake. Micah hesitated. Then, with a slow breath, he followed her inside. The cave swallowed sound. Their footsteps echoed against the stone, distant and hollow. The deeper they went, the colder it became, the damp air thick with the scent of earth and something faintly metallic. Micah kept his revolver drawn, the weight of it familiar, steadying. Etsila stopped abruptly. We should not linger. Micah stepped beside her, his gaze adjusting to the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but rock and emptiness. Then, as his vision sharpened, he noticed the carvings etched into the walls. Figures twisted in agony, their shapes distorted, mouths open in silent screams. His fingers brushed one of the engravings. The stone was smooth, almost polished, as if it had been touched by countless hands before his own. A chill crept up his spine. What the hell is this place? Etsila's voice was quiet, reverent. A warning. Micah turned to her, about to speak, but then the cave shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. A pressure settled against his skull, filling his ears with a dull hum. The carvings along the walls seemed to shift, their forms writhing beneath the flickering light of their lantern. Then came the whisper, not from the wind, not from Etsila, from the dark. Micah's pulse hammered. The sound wrapped around his bones, his breath turning shallow. A voice, low, guttural, spoke in a language he did not understand, but its meaning burned into his mind like a brand. Etsila inhaled sharply, stepping back. We need to leave. Now. Micah didn't argue. They turned, moving quickly, the walls pressing closer. But as they neared the cave's entrance, the shadows shifted again. A figure stood at the threshold. Not a man. Not entirely. It loomed. Its form stretched impossibly tall, its limbs thin as bones, but its presence vast, suffocating. Eyes like burning coals stared from a face half shrouded in darkness, its mouth twisting in something that was not a smile, not quite. Micah's grip on the revolver tightened. His instinct screamed to fire, but something deeper, something primal, held him still. Atsila spoke first, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "You have no claim here." The figure tilted its head. Then, slowly, it raised one elongated hand and pointed. Not at Atsila, at Micah. A sharp pain lanced through his skull, blinding, unbearable. He staggered, barely aware of Atsila grabbing his arm, dragging him forward. The world blurred, the cave spinning, twisting. And then they were outside, gasping against the cold night air. The cave behind them was silent. The figure was gone. Micah collapsed onto his knees, his breath ragged. His hands shook. The pain in his skull faded, leaving behind only a dull throb. But something was wrong. He could still hear the whisper, faint, distant, but there. Atsila knelt beside him, her expression grim. "Something has marked you." Micah exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to his temple. "What the hell does that mean?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, "It means the dead won't let you go." Micah looked up at the stars, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing against his chest. For the first time in years, he truly felt hunted. The trail twisted through a dense web of skeletal trees, their gnarled limbs clawing at the sky. The moon, swollen and distant, cast a sickly glow over the land, stretching their shadows thin. Micah rode in silence, his thoughts a tangled mess of past and present, of things seen and unseen. The whisper in his skull remained a distant hum, a voice just beyond the reach of understanding. Atsila rode beside him, her presence steady, yet unreadable. She had said little since the cave, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. They were being followed. Micah didn't know if it was men, spirits, or something worse, but the feeling gnawed at him like an old wound. He had lived too long in the company of death not to recognize when it lingered near. His hand rested on the worn grip of his revolver, his thumb brushing against the notches carved into the metal. Too many ghosts, too many names. Ahead, the land sloped downward into a valley where an abandoned mining town lay in ruin, swallowed by time and dust. The buildings sagged, their roofs caved in, their bones exposed to the elements. A place forgotten, or perhaps deliberately left behind. "We camp here," Micah asked. Atsila nodded. "The land is quiet." Micah wasn't sure he believed that. They moved through the hollow streets, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of ash and dirt. The saloon, its windows shattered, loomed like a skeleton against the night. The church stood at the far end of the town, its doors unhinged, its steeple leaning as if bowing to something unseen. Micah swung down from his saddle, leading his horse toward what remained of the stable. The air carried a dry, metallic scent, rust, or blood long since dried. He ignored it. Inside the remnants of a general store, Atsila set up a small fire, feeding it cautiously, as if too much flame might wake something better left sleeping. Micah sat across from her, stretching his aching limbs. His body was weary, but sleep would not come easy. He watched Atsila as she worked, her hands deftly sorting through a small pouch of dried herbs. "What do you think's out there?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Something old?" Micah scoffed. Not much of an answer. Her gaze lifted then, dark and piercing. "You hear it, don't you?" He hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. Atsila's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened, as if she had expected his answer. "There are things in this world that do not belong to men. You have walked too close to them." Micah sighed, rubbing his temple. "Well, ain't much I can do about it now." She studied him for a moment before pulling a small, bone-carved pendant from a leather cord around her neck. She placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it. The charm was smooth, worn from time, but there was weight to it, an energy that pulsed faintly against his skin. "It will not protect you," she said, "but it may remind them you do not belong to them." Micah frowned but pocketed the charm without question. The wind shifted. The fire flickered. Then, from the darkness beyond the ruined buildings, something moved. A figure, barely visible, stood just beyond the edge of the firelight. Micah was on his feet in an instant, his revolver drawn, his breath sharp. Atsila remained still, her eyes fixed on the shape with a quiet intensity. The figure took a step closer. Moonlight touched its face, revealing something that should not be. A man and yet not. Its features were stretched, its mouth too wide, its eyes hollow and black as coal. The skin, pale and paper-thin, clung too tightly to the bone beneath. It did not blink. It did not breathe. Micah took a step back, his grip tightening around the revolver. Atsila whispered something in Lakota, a prayer or a warning. Micah wasn't sure. The figure tilted its head, as if listening. Then it spoke. Not in words, not in anything human. A sound filled the air, twisting through the wind. A voice that was not a voice, a whisper that scraped against the inside of Micah's skull. It knew his name. Micah fired. The gunshot shattered the silence, the bullet tearing through the figure's chest. For a moment, it stood there, swaying slightly, as if deciding whether or not to fall. Then it crumpled, folding into itself like paper caught in the wind. But the whisper remained. Atsila grabbed his arm. "We have to leave." Micah didn't argue. He holstered his gun, moving quickly toward the horses. The wind howled, carrying the sound of distant laughter. Cruel, echoing, ancient. As they mounted, the shadows at the edge of town deepened, shifting, moving. More figures, more shapes just beyond sight. Watching, waiting. Micah spurred his horse forward, Atsila beside him. They rode hard, the ruins swallowed by the dark behind them. The whisper did not fade. It stayed with him, threading through the wind, curling beneath his skin. They were not done with him yet. The storm gathered like a living thing, thick with the scent of rain and earth, curling low over the barren expanse of the valley. Thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling like drumbeats of war. Micah Bell pressed his heels into his horse's flanks, feeling the tension coiling in his gut. His body ached, exhaustion lacing his every breath, but he could not stop. Not now. Not with death snapping at his heels. Atsila rode beside him, her gaze fixed ahead, her dark hair tangled in the wind. She had not spoken much since the abandoned town, but her silence carried weight. She knew what lay ahead. So did Micah. Elijah Graves was waiting. The outlaw had been a shadow at Micah's back for too long, and now the chase was at its end. Ahead, through the streaks of lightning and haze of dust, the ruins of an old church loomed against the darkened sky, a broken relic of the frontier, its cross long fallen, its walls charred from fire long forgotten. Micah pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the clearing, the beast snorting unsettled. The air here was thick, pressing against his skin, heavy with something unseen. At the church doors, half hidden in the flickering torchlight, Graves stood waiting, flanked by his men. He looked the same, grinning like the devil himself, a cigarette burning low between his lips. His duster was damp from the coming rain, but the gleam in his eyes was untouched by the weight of the storm. "'Bout time, Bell," Graves called, his voice smooth, lazy. "Thought you might have lost your nerve." Micah swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking into the damp earth. His revolver felt like an extension of his hand, his fingers steady on the grip. "No nerve left to lose," he replied, stepping forward. Graves chuckled, shaking his head. "Man like you, always running, always looking for some kind of peace that don't belong to you." He gestured around them. "But this is where it ends." Micah's breath was slow, measured. He could feel it now. Something watching, something shifting in the spaces between the lightning flashes. The whisper in his skull grew louder. Atsila dismounted, stepping closer to him. "This place," she murmured just for him. "It is wrong." Micah already knew. The land here felt cursed, soaked in old blood. And yet he did not waver. Graves took another step, rolling his shoulders. You know, Belle, I never cared much for revenge. He tossed the cigarette aside, crushing it under his boot. But you, his voice dipped lower, you took something from me. Micah's jaw tensed. The locket, Graves continued, reaching into his pocket. Been holding on to this for a long time. He pulled it free, a small silver locket, its surface blackened, worn by time. Micah felt the world tilt. That locket, he knew it. It had belonged to Thomas Delaney, a man Micah had once called a friend, a soldier who had bled out in the dirt while Micah rode away, leaving behind nothing but ghosts and regret. Graves smirked at the recognition in Micah's eyes. Yeah, you remember now, don't you? He let the locket swing from its chain, its presence thick with something more than memory. This ain't just metal, Belle. This is a soul trapped in silver. Adsila tensed beside Micah. That is dark magic. Graves shrugged. Call it what you want. His fingers curled around the locket. But I think Delaney's got a score to settle. The wind howled through the ruins, and then the earth moved. The ground beneath them trembled, and from the shadows within the church, something rose. Micah staggered back as the darkness coalesced, taking form. A figure, twisted and wrong, its shape shifting between flesh and smoke. Its eyes burned like dying embers, its mouth opening in a soundless scream. It was Delaney, or what remained of him. The whispers in Micah's head surged into a deafening roar. Adsila moved first, chanting in Lakota, her voice sharp, cutting through the howling wind. She grabbed Micah's arm, her touch grounding him. Do not let it take you. Graves laughed, stepping back. Ain't up to him no more. The creature lunged. Micah fired. The bullet tore through its chest, but it did not falter. It moved like smoke, twisting, reforming, its presence pressing against him like the weight of 1,000 sins. He had been running for so long, running from the past, from the dead, from himself. No more. He holstered the gun. This fight would not be won with bullets. Taking a breath, he stepped forward, meeting the burning gaze of the thing that had once been his friend. Delaney, he said, his voice raw. It's me. The figure shuddered, its form flickering. Micah clenched his fists. I should have stayed. I should have saved you. The words burned his throat, truth long buried rising like bile. I was a coward. The creature hesitated. The wind slowed. Graves' grin faltered. What the hell are you? Micah kept his gaze locked on Delaney. I left you to die, and I've been paying for it every damn day since. He exhaled, the weight of it all crashing down. I ain't running no more. The creature trembled. Adsila took a step closer, her voice softer now, guiding. Let go, she whispered. Both of you. Delaney's form flickered again. Then, slowly, it began to dissolve. The locket in Graves' hand burned white-hot. He cursed, dropping it. The moment it hit the ground, the storm broke. The wind died. The earth stilled. The darkness lifted. Delaney was gone. Graves stared at the smoldering locket, realization creeping into his expression. No, he muttered. His eyes snapped to Micah. You took that from me. Micah met his gaze. I took nothing from you. Before Graves could react, Micah drew his gun and fired. The bullet struck true. Graves staggered, a breath of disbelief escaping his lips before he crumpled to the ground. His men, already shaken, scattered like rats. Silence fell over the valley. Micah stood there, the revolver still smoking in his hand, his breath ragged. Adsila placed a hand over the locket, murmuring something soft. The silver turned to dust. Micah swallowed hard. It's over. Adsila looked at him, her gaze deep knowing. No, she said quietly, but it has begun again. He didn't ask what she meant. Together, they walked away from the ruins, leaving the dead behind. For the first time in years, Micah felt something like peace.